The rain fell steadily on Cobb Road that Tuesday morning, washing the Birmingham streets clean, or so it seemed. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen stood outside number 47, watching as forensics teams emerged with boxes of evidence. She couldn't have known then that this single address would unravel a criminal empire worth £17 million, stretching from the industrial heart of England to the windswept shores of Northern Ireland. Before we dive into this incredible story, I need to know, where are you watching from right now? This operation spanned from Birmingham to Bangor, and I'm fascinated to see how far these true crime stories reach. Drop your city in the comments, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next in this web of deception, betrayal, and ultimate justice. The morning of March 15, 2017, began like any other on the quiet residential streets of East Birmingham. Children walked to school, commuters hurried to catch buses, and elderly neighbors tended their gardens. But beneath this facade of normalcy lay something far more sinister, a network so vast and sophisticated that it would take Britain's top investigators nearly 6 years to fully unravel. Number 47 Cobb Road looked unremarkable, a modest, semi-detached house with a small front garden and faded brick facade. The neighbors knew Mr. Khan as a quiet man who kept to himself, drove a modest Honda Civic, and never caused trouble. They had no idea that this unassuming property was the nerve center of one of the UK's most lucrative drug money laundering operations. What they didn't know would shock them to their core. Amiran Zeb Khan wasn't your typical drug lord. At 38, he possessed the calculating mind of a businessman and the ruthless ambition of a criminal mastermind. Unlike the flashy gangsters of popular imagination, Khan understood that true power lay in invisibility. While other criminals flaunted their wealth with expensive cars and jewelry, Khan invested every dirty penny into something far more valuable: respectability. The most dangerous criminals, former NCA Director Lynn Owens once said, are the ones you never see coming. Khan's operation wasn't built overnight. It was the product of meticulous planning that began in 2010, when he first recognized the potential of the UK's insatiable appetite for heroin. But Khan had a vision that went far beyond street-level dealing. He saw an opportunity to create something unprecedented, a criminal enterprise that could operate in plain sight, generating millions in legitimate rental income while washing the proceeds of one of history's most successful heroin importation schemes. The genius lay in the simplicity. Why hide money in offshore accounts when you could invest it in British property? Why risk detection with flashy purchases when you could build a portfolio that would make any estate agent envious? But genius, as we'll see, has its own blind spots. Khan's network extended far beyond Birmingham city limits. His contacts in Lahore and Karachi weren't just suppliers. They were partners in an international conspiracy that would eventually span 3 continents. Through encrypted communications and coded messages, they coordinated shipments that would arrive at Britain's ports hidden within the most mundane industrial equipment. The first successful shipment in February 2014 should have been their warning to quit while ahead. Instead, it became their addiction. Muhammad Ali, Khan's right-hand man, lived just 3 streets away on Wyncliffe Road. At 36, Ali possessed the organizational skills that kept the operation running smoothly. While Khan provided the vision and Pakistani connections, Ali handled the day-to-day logistics that ensured heroin flowed into Birmingham, while clean money flowed out into property purchases. The partnership was perfect. Khan was the architect. Ali was the builder. The third member of their triumvirate was Sergeant Hussein, a 32-year-old logistics expert who understood shipping routes, customs procedures, and import regulations better than most legitimate businessmen. Hussein's role was crucial. He identified the vulnerabilities in Britain's border security and exploited them with surgical precision. Together, they formed what investigators would later describe as the most sophisticated drug importation network we've ever encountered. By 2011, the transformation had begun. What started as a handful of student rental properties in Oak had evolved into something far more ambitious. The gang didn't just buy properties, they strategically acquired them, focusing on areas where young professionals and students created steady rental demand. But this wasn't random property investment. This was criminal architecture at its finest. The numbers were staggering. 59 properties across Birmingham, Sandwell, and Northern Ireland, 34 student houses generating thousands in monthly rental income, several industrial units that could store legitimate businesses alongside less legitimate activities. Even a public gym, Rampage Fitness, where unsuspecting members worked out above offices where millions in drug money changed hands. In some neighborhoods, they owned entire streets, 5 houses on Elm Road, 6 properties on Victoria Street. To casual observers, it looked like smart investment. To the National Crime Agency, it looked like something else entirely. But the most shocking part of their empire wasn't in Birmingham at all. It was 300 miles away in Northern Ireland. Here's where the story takes its first major twist. 300 miles from Birmingham, in the seaside town of Bangor, Northern Ireland, Khan's relatives were playing their own crucial role in the operation. The Taj Tandoori restaurant, owned by Khan's extended family, wasn't just serving authentic Pakistani cuisine. It was serving as a crucial money laundering hub. Detective Constable Michael O'Brien of the Police Service of Northern Ireland first noticed the anomalies in December 2011. The restaurant's bank accounts showed deposits that far exceeded what any legitimate restaurant could generate. Thousands of pounds appeared weekly, always in cash, always with implausible explanations. When a restaurant in a town of 60,000 people is depositing more cash than establishments in central London, you start asking questions. The Bangor properties weren't just investments. They were strategic assets that allowed the gang to move money across jurisdictions, complicating any potential investigation. British authorities would need cooperation from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland would need to coordinate with mainland UK. The jurisdictional complexity was intentional and brilliant, or so they thought. The gang's focus on student housing revealed another layer of their sophistication. Students paid rent in advance, often with parental guarantees, creating steady cash flows that appeared completely legitimate. Better yet, student tenants rarely questioned their landlords or scrutinized property ownership records. Each student house generated between £2,000 and £4,000 monthly in rental income. Multiplied across 34 properties, the gang was collecting over £100,000 per month in apparently clean money. This income provided the perfect cover for their money laundering activities while generating legitimate tax records that further enhanced their respectable facade. But success bred ambition, and ambition would prove to be their downfall. What happened next would change everything. The Port of London Gateway processes thousands of containers daily. Massive cargo ships arrive from across the globe, carrying everything from electronics to industrial equipment. Among the legitimate trade, criminal organizations have always sought opportunities to hide their contraband. But Khan's network had identified something unique: heavy industrial lathes from Pakistan. These machines were perfect for concealment. They were solid, difficult to inspect without specialized equipment, and their weight fluctuations could be explained by different metal compositions. Most importantly, they were expensive enough that importing them appeared legitimate for any industrial operation. The beauty of the plan was its mundane nature. Who would suspect industrial machinery of hiding millions in heroin? February 14, 2014, Valentine's Day. While couples across Britain exchanged gifts, Khan's first container slipped through customs undetected. Hidden within 3 industrial lathes were packages of high-purity heroin worth millions on the street. The irony wasn't lost on investigators who later reviewed the timeline. On a day dedicated to love, Khan's network had successfully imported enough heroin to destroy thousands of lives and relationships. The successful arrival of this shipment should have satisfied any reasonable criminal enterprise. Instead, it intoxicated them with possibility. Muhammad Ashraf Khan, the 49-year-old logistics coordinator, later told investigators that the successful import gave the entire network unprecedented confidence. They had beaten British customs. They had proved their methods worked. The only logical next step was to scale up. They had no idea they were being watched. What the gang didn't know was that their success had already attracted attention from an entirely different direction. The police service of Northern Ireland's routine monitoring of the Bangor properties had triggered a confidential intelligence report that landed on the desk of Andy Lewis, head of the National Crime Agency's Asset Denial Team. Lewis, a 20-year veteran of financial crime investigation, recognized the patterns immediately. Properties owned by individuals with declared incomes that couldn't support the mortgages. Cash transactions that appeared legitimate but followed suspicious patterns. Multiple properties registered to family members and associates with no apparent connection to property investment. In this business, Lewis later explained, it's not what you see that matters. It's what you don't see. The absences, the gaps, the things that should be there but aren't. The NCA's initial investigation was methodical and invisible. They didn't raid properties or interview suspects. Instead, they analyzed bank records, property registrations, and financial flows. They mapped relationships and identified patterns. They built a picture of the network without the network knowing they were being observed. This patient approach would ultimately prove decisive. By mid-2014, the NCA had identified the core structure of Khan's operation. They knew about the Birmingham properties, the Northern Ireland connections, and the suspicious financial patterns. What they didn't have was proof of criminal activity that would stand up in court. That changed when British intelligence intercepted communications, suggesting another major shipment was in preparation. This time the authorities were ready. Rather than intercept the shipment at the port, they made a calculated decision that would define the entire investigation. They would let it through and follow it to its destination. Detective Inspector Chen, who coordinated the surveillance operation, later described the decision as the longest 48 hours of my career. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they lost track of the shipment, 165 kilograms of heroin would disappear into Britain's drug distribution network. If they maintained surveillance successfully, they could capture the entire conspiracy in action. The second container arrived at London Gateway Port on a humid August morning. To dock workers and customs officials conducting routine inspections, it appeared identical to thousands of others. Industrial equipment from Pakistan, properly documented and appearing entirely legitimate. But this container was different. Hidden within its metal lathes was enough heroin to supply Britain's street dealers for months. More importantly, every aspect of its journey was being monitored by the National Crime Agency's most sophisticated surveillance unit. The decision to let it through customs required approval at the highest levels of British law enforcement. One mistake could mean 165 kilograms of heroin disappearing forever. Border Force officers Mark Stevens and Jennifer Walsh conducted the routine inspection that would later be described in court. Using specialized scanning equipment, they confirmed the presence of foreign objects within the machinery. But instead of seizing the drugs immediately, they carefully resealed the equipment and allowed the container to continue its journey. Every instinct told us to make the arrest right there, Stevens later testified. But we knew this was our only chance to expose the entire network. The container's journey from London Gateway to the industrial unit in Sandwell, West Midlands, was monitored by a coordinated surveillance operation involving over 50 officers across multiple agencies. Helicopter surveillance, unmarked vehicles, and strategically placed observation posts tracked every mile of the journey. The destination was Unit 17B at Sandwell Industrial Estate, a nondescript warehouse that appeared to house legitimate engineering equipment. The unit was registered to a shell company with directors who existed only on paper, another layer of the gang's sophisticated money laundering scheme. At 2:47 p.m., Omar Issa and Imran Arif arrived at the industrial unit. These two men, aged 36 and 35 respectively, were trusted operatives in Khan's network. Neither had criminal records. Both appeared to be legitimate businessmen involved in industrial equipment importing. Their presence at the unit was their first mistake. Their second mistake was assuming they weren't being watched. What happened next was captured by covert surveillance equipment that had been installed weeks earlier. Issa and Arif, unaware that every word and movement was being recorded, began the careful process of unloading the industrial lathes. The audio recordings later played in court captured their excitement as they prepared to extract what they believed was millions of pounds worth of undetected heroin. Their casual conversation revealed the operation's scope and their roles within the larger conspiracy. "This is enough to keep us sorted for months," Issa was recorded saying. "Khan's going to be pleased." The irony was devastating. As they spoke about Khan's expected satisfaction, NCA surveillance teams were documenting evidence that would ultimately send their leader to prison for 22 years. At 4:15 p.m., Issa and Arif began cutting open the industrial lathes. The surveillance footage shows their initial confusion as they discovered that the heroin packages were missing. What they found instead were tracking devices and a note from the National Crime Agency. The note was simple. We know who you are. We know what you've done. And we're coming. The looks on their faces, captured in high-definition video, would later become evidence of their guilt and awareness of the criminal conspiracy. But the real shock was yet to come. Here's where this story takes a turn that shocked even seasoned investigators. The NCA's success in tracking the second shipment wasn't entirely due to superior surveillance techniques. They had help from inside Khan's organization. Zulfikar Munsaf, the 38-year-old messenger who carried communications between Khan and his operatives, had been feeding information to British authorities for over 8 months. His decision to become an informant wasn't motivated by conscience. It was motivated by fear. Munsaf later testified that he knew the operation was becoming too large and too visible to remain undetected indefinitely. The revelation of Munsaf's cooperation sent shockwaves through Khan's network. The man they had trusted with their most sensitive communications had been documenting their activities for the National Crime Agency. Phone calls, meeting locations, financial transactions, everything had been compromised. Munsaf's double life revealed the psychological pressure that ultimately breaks even the most sophisticated criminal organizations. By day, he maintained his role as Khan's trusted messenger, carrying instructions and collecting intelligence from various parts of the network. By night, he met with NCA handlers, providing detailed reports that would form the backbone of the prosecution's case. The stress was unbearable, Munsaf later told investigators. I knew that if Khan discovered the truth, I wouldn't just go to prison. I wouldn't survive. His decision to cooperate early would ultimately save him from the harshest sentences imposed on his co-conspirators. With Munsaf's intelligence and the evidence from the Sandwell operation, the NCA began preparing for simultaneous raids across Birmingham and Northern Ireland. The operation, codenamed Golden Web, would be one of the largest coordinated strikes against organized crime in British history. But Khan's network still had one more surprise in store. What investigators discovered during the raids would exceed even their most ambitious expectations. At exactly 6 a.m. on March 15, 2017, 200 officers from the National Crime Agency, West Midlands Police, and the Police Service of Northern Ireland simultaneously struck 47 addresses across England and Northern Ireland. The coordinated operation was the culmination of 6 years of investigation and represented the largest asset seizure in British criminal history. Detective Inspector Chen led the team that arrested Khan at his Cobb Road residence. The man who had built a £17 million property empire showed no emotion as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His only words were a request to call his lawyer. But it was what they found in his house that truly shocked investigators. Khan's modest exterior belied an interior that revealed the true scope of his wealth. Hidden behind a false wall in his basement, officers discovered detailed records of every property purchase, every financial transaction, and every aspect of the money laundering operation. The documents were meticulously organized in filing cabinets that revealed the mind of a man who approached crime with the systematic precision of a legitimate businessman. Purchase agreements, rental records, bank statements, and correspondence with Pakistani suppliers. Everything was documented with obsessive detail. It was like discovering the accounting records of a Fortune 500 company, Chen later testified. Except this company's product was human misery. Among the documents was a ledger that detailed the gang's profits over 7 years. The numbers were staggering. £23 million in heroin sales, £17 million invested in property, and over £6 million in cash reserves hidden across multiple jurisdictions. But there was more, much more. You're not going to believe what they found next. Hidden in a secret compartment beneath Khan's kitchen floor was a collection of Pakistani passports, all bearing different names but Khan's photograph. The fake documents revealed that Khan had been planning escape routes for years, maintaining multiple identities that would allow him to disappear if his operation was ever discovered. There were also detailed maps of alternative shipping routes through European ports, backup suppliers in Afghanistan and Turkey, and plans for expanding the operation into cocaine trafficking from South America. Khan hadn't just built a criminal empire, he had designed it to be virtually indestructible. Muhammad Ali's arrest at his Wincliffe Road home revealed another cache of evidence. Hidden in his attic were communication devices used for encrypted conversations with suppliers in Pakistan, detailed shipping schedules and photographs of heroin packages concealed within industrial equipment. But the most shocking discovery was a series of photographs showing Ali meeting with corrupt customs officials at various British ports. The photographs revealed that Khan's network had been systematically bribing border security personnel to ensure their shipments passed through customs without intensive inspection. 3 customs officers were subsequently arrested and charged with corruption, expanding the scandal beyond the original drug trafficking conspiracy. Sarjid Hussain, arrested at his Fieldhouse Road address, maintained his innocence until officers showed him surveillance footage of his meetings with Pakistani suppliers. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Hussein's arrest revealed another dimension of the operation that investigators hadn't anticipated. Hidden in Hussein's garage was a sophisticated drug processing laboratory where raw heroin was refined and cut for street distribution. The lab was equipped with professional-grade chemical equipment and had been operating undetected for over 3 years. Analysis of residue samples revealed that the lab had processed hundreds of kilograms of heroin, generating profits that dwarfed even the investigators' most ambitious estimates. One by one, the remaining members of the network were arrested and presented with evidence of their involvement. Omar Issa and Imran Arif, already identified through the Sandwell surveillance, were arrested at their respective homes. The contrast between their modest living conditions and their roles in a multi-million-pound operation highlighted the gang's strategy of maintaining low profiles while accumulating vast wealth. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. As NCA teams secured the various properties linked to the network, they discovered that the gang's real estate empire was even more extensive than initially believed. Hidden ownership structures, shell companies, and nominee arrangements had concealed the true extent of their property portfolio. The final count was staggering. 59 properties worth £17 million, generating over £150,000 monthly in rental income. The properties ranged from modest student houses to luxury apartments, from industrial units to commercial premises. Each property told part of the story of how drug money had been systematically laundered into Britain's legitimate economy. But here comes the most shocking twist of all. During the search of a storage unit registered to one of Khan's shell companies, investigators discovered evidence of an even larger conspiracy. Documents revealed that Khan's network was just one cell of a massive international drug trafficking organization, with operations across Europe, Asia, and North America. The storage unit contained detailed organizational charts showing dozens of similar operations in cities across Europe. Each operation followed the same model: heroin importation followed by property-based money laundering. The scale was breathtaking. Investigators estimated that the broader organization controlled assets worth over £200 million across multiple countries. Communications found in the storage unit revealed that Khan had been planning to expand his operation into synthetic drug manufacturing, money laundering through cryptocurrency exchanges, and human trafficking for forced labor in his legitimate businesses. The man they thought they understood was actually planning to become one of Europe's most powerful crime bosses. The arrests in Britain triggered a coordinated response from Pakistani authorities. Dawn raids in Lahore and Karachi resulted in the arrest of 6 suppliers who had been providing heroin to Khan's network. The international cooperation revealed the truly global nature of the conspiracy. This wasn't just a British crime story, it was an international operation that spanned continents. But the Pakistani raids revealed something that sent shockwaves through international law enforcement. The suppliers weren't just drug dealers. They were connected to terrorist organizations that were using drug profits to fund operations across the Middle East and South Asia. The connection between Khan's property empire and international terrorism elevated the case to the highest levels of national security. MI5 and the CIA became involved in the investigation, tracing financial flows that connected Birmingham rental properties to terrorist training camps in remote areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not just talking about drug trafficking anymore. We're talking about terrorism financing on an international scale. The trial of Amiran Zeb Khan and his associates became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Birmingham's legal history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, law enforcement officials, and family members of both the defendants and the victims of their crimes. Judge Michael Harrison, presiding over the case, described it as one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises ever to appear before a British court. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Crown prosecutor Sarah Williams presented the case with the precision of a surgeon. each piece of evidence built upon the previous one, creating an overwhelming picture of guilt that would be impossible for the defense to refute. The surveillance footage from Sandwell was particularly damning. Jurors watched as Isa and Arif discussed their excitement about the heroin shipment, unknowingly providing verbal confirmation of their criminal intent. The property records told an equally compelling story. Williams demonstrated how individuals with modest declared incomes had accumulated property portfolios worth millions, with mortgage applications that contained obvious falsehoods and financial statements that defied logical explanation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Williams told the court, "this was not opportunistic crime. This was systematic, calculated, and devastatingly effective criminal enterprise that threatened not just individual lives, but national security itself." The defense attorneys faced an almost impossible task. The evidence against their clients was overwhelming, the surveillance was comprehensive, and the financial records were damning. Their strategy focused on minimizing their clients' roles and arguing for reduced sentences based on cooperation. Khan's lawyer, QC Robert Matthews, argued that his client was merely a property investor who had made poor choices about his business associates. The argument was unconvincing, given the evidence of Khan's central role in coordinating the entire operation, including the fake passports, the escape plans, and the connections to international terrorism. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Before sentencing, the court heard devastating testimony from the families of heroin addiction victims. Margaret Thompson, whose 23-year-old son died from an overdose using heroin that investigators linked to Khan's network, delivered a statement that left the courtroom in tears. "These men didn't just sell drugs," she testified. "They sold death. They sold the destruction of families. They sold the end of dreams and the beginning of nightmares. And they used our own property market, our own system, to legitimize their evil." Her words encapsulated the human cost of Khan's business empire. But there was more testimony that revealed the true scope of the damage. Detective Inspector Chen presented evidence showing that Khan's network had been responsible for distributing over 500 kilograms of heroin across the UK between 2010 and 2017. This single operation had directly contributed to hundreds of overdoses, thousands of addiction cases, and immeasurable family destruction. But the terrorism connection added another dimension to the victims' impact statements. Representatives from MI5 testified that the financial flows from Khan's operation had been traced to terrorist attacks in 3 different countries, resulting in over 50 deaths and hundreds of injuries. Judge Harrison's sentencing remarks were comprehensive and unflinching. He described the defendants as architects of misery who prioritized profit over human life and national security and imposed sentences that reflected the severity of their crimes. Amiran Zeb Khan received 22 years imprisonment, but that wasn't the end of his punishment. Muhammad Ali also received 22 years imprisonment, while Sarjeed Hussain was sentenced to 22 years as well. The 3 ringleaders received identical sentences, reflecting their equal culpability in directing the criminal enterprise. Muhammad Ashraf Khan was sentenced to 17.5 years imprisonment. Rajesh Patel received 15.5 years. Omar Issa was given 15.5 years imprisonment, while Imran Arif received 10 years. Despite his cooperation with authorities, Zulfikar Munsaf was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment, reflecting his extensive involvement in the conspiracy. But the sentences were only part of the justice served. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act, the NCA initiated comprehensive asset recovery proceedings that would strip the gang of every penny of their ill-gotten gains. All 59 properties were seized and would be sold, with proceeds going to victim compensation funds and law enforcement resources. The total recovery exceeded £17 million, representing one of the largest asset seizures in British criminal history. Andy Lewis of the NCA's asset denial team called it a complete dismantling of a criminal empire that took years to build and minutes to destroy. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. The successful prosecution and asset recovery sent shockwaves through Britain's criminal community. The case demonstrated that sophisticated money laundering schemes could not protect criminals from determined investigation and international cooperation. However, it also revealed something that law enforcement officials were reluctant to discuss publicly. During the investigation, the NCA had identified at least 12 other similar operations across the UK. Khan's network wasn't unique. It was part of a broader pattern of international criminal organizations using British property markets to launder drug profits. The resources required to investigate and prosecute Khan's network meant that these other operations continued operating undetected. The seized properties were eventually sold, with the proceeds funding drug treatment programs, victim support services, and enhanced law enforcement capabilities. In a sense, Khan's criminal empire was transformed into a force for good. Detective Inspector Chen, reflecting on the case years later, described it as proof that patient investigation and international cooperation can defeat even the most sophisticated criminal networks. But the story doesn't end with the sentencing. The Khan case became a template for investigating modern criminal enterprises that blur the lines between organized crime and legitimate business. Law enforcement agencies worldwide studied the techniques used to identify and dismantle the property-based money laundering scheme. The case also highlighted the importance of civil asset recovery in combating organized crime. Traditional criminal prosecutions, while essential, only address individual culpability. Asset recovery attacks the financial foundations that make criminal enterprises possible. The message was clear. Crime might pay in the short term, but it will ultimately cost everything. Today, the former Khan properties house legitimate tenants who have no idea of their building's criminal history. Students attend classes, families raise children, and businesses operate in spaces that once served as the foundation of a criminal empire. The transformation is symbolic of justice's ultimate victory over criminality. But questions remain that continue to challenge law enforcement worldwide. If Khan's sophisticated operation could operate undetected for years while generating £17 million in property investments, how many similar networks remain hidden? The NCA estimates that only a small percentage of high-level money laundering operations are ever detected and prosecuted. The resources required to investigate cases like Khan's mean that law enforcement agencies must prioritize carefully, potentially allowing smaller but still significant criminal enterprises to operate without interference. The sobering reality is that Khan's network was discovered partly through luck. The suspicious property patterns noticed by Northern Irish officers in 2011. The case highlighted vulnerabilities in multiple systems: border security, property regulations, financial oversight, and international cooperation mechanisms. While reforms have addressed some of these weaknesses, others remain. Criminal organizations study law enforcement successes and adapt their methods accordingly. The techniques that expose Khan's network may be less effective against the next generation of sophisticated criminals. So what do you think about this incredible case? The sentences, the investigation, the international connections, the terrorism links? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And here's what I really want to know. If you had been one of the tenants in Khan's properties, unknowingly funding a criminal empire with your rent money, how would that make you feel? This story shows how sophisticated modern criminal networks have become. But it also proves that justice, though sometimes slow, can be thorough and devastating when it finally arrives. Smash that like button if you believe the sentences were appropriate for the crimes committed. And let me know in the comments. What aspect of this case shocked you the most? The property empire, the international connections, the terrorism financing, or the ultimate betrayal that brought it all down? If you want more deep dive true crime stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. I spend weeks researching each case to bring you the full story behind the headlines. There are always more shocking cases waiting to be uncovered, and your support helps me continue investigating the criminal networks that operate in the shadows of our society. Hit that subscribe button, because justice never sleeps, and neither do the stories that need to be told.